I never thought I'd be the guy who'd actually pack his wife's bags and tell her to leave. But here we are, and honestly, I should have done it way sooner. It started about 8 months into our marriage. These little comments she'd make about my best friend Max. Nothing crazy at first, just weird little observations like how tall he was or how his job was more exciting than mine. But then it got worse, way worse. She started saying it in front of people, at dinners, at birthday parties, at family gatherings. This running joke about how she'd totally leave me for Max if she ever got the chance, and everyone would laugh uncomfortably while I'd just sit there feeling like an idiot. The first time she said it was at my brother's barbecue. We were all standing around the grill, and she just casually dropped this comment about being gone in a heartbeat if Max ever asked. And everyone went quiet for like 3 seconds before somebody changed the subject. And I pulled her aside later asking what the hell that was about. And she just rolled her eyes and told me I was being too sensitive, that it was obviously a joke, that I needed to lighten up. But she kept doing it, over and over. At my parents' anniversary dinner, she told my mom how I was a great son, but Max was just on another level. And my mom's face went completely white. My dad actually put down his fork and stared at her, and she just laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Max himself was uncomfortable as hell. He pulled me aside one night after she'd made another comment at a bar with our friend group and told me straight up this wasn't okay. That he didn't know why she kept saying this stuff, but he wasn't into it. That I needed to talk to her. And I did talk to her, multiple times, but every single time she'd flip it back on me, telling me I was insecure, that I couldn't take a joke, that maybe if I had more confidence it wouldn't bother me so much. The thing is, it wasn't just the comments, it was the way she'd look at him when she thought nobody was watching, the way she'd find excuses to stand next to him at parties, the way she'd always ask if Max was coming to whatever event we were going to, and if he wasn't, she'd suddenly be less interested in going. My sister noticed it too. She grabbed me at Thanksgiving and pointed out how weird things were getting with my wife and Max, and I just shrugged because what was I supposed to say? That my wife had this bizarre obsession with my best friend, but claimed it was all just humor? The breaking point came at my parents' house 3 months ago. We were having dinner with my whole family, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. And somehow the conversation turned to celebrity crushes or something stupid like that. And my wife saw her opening and took it. She literally announced to the entire table how if we're talking about people she'd actually leave me for, she'd choose Max in a heartbeat, and she wasn't even joking anymore. And the entire room went silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My grandmother looked like she'd seen a ghost. My dad's jaw was clenched so tight, I thought he'd crack a tooth. And I just sat there feeling this wave of humiliation wash over me. Something snapped in me right then. I stood up from the table, told her that if she wanted him so bad she should go get him because I was done with these jokes. And I walked out of the room, grabbed my keys, and drove home alone. She showed up an hour later acting like I was the one who'd ruined dinner, telling me I'd embarrassed her in front of my family. And that's when I told her we needed to talk seriously or this marriage was over. That conversation went nowhere. She kept deflecting, kept saying I was overreacting, kept insisting that she loved me and Max was just a friend, and why couldn't I understand that women joke differently than men? But I wasn't buying it anymore. So I did something I'm not proud of but needed to do. I called Max. I needed to know if there was something I was missing, if maybe she'd been messaging him or saying things to him privately. And what he told me made my blood run cold. He said she'd been texting him for months. Nothing inappropriate exactly, but constant messages asking about his day, his work, his gym schedule, wanting to meet up for coffee without me there, showing up at his gym even though it was across town from where she worked, sitting near him and trying to start conversations. Max said he'd been ignoring most of it, giving short replies, making excuses not to meet up, but she kept pushing, and he didn't want to tell me because he thought maybe it would blow over. Maybe she was just being friendly, but now he realized it was way more than that. He admitted he thought she was actually obsessed with him and didn't know what to do about it. And hearing him say that out loud made everything click into place. All those jokes weren't jokes at all. They were her way of testing the waters, of normalizing this fantasy she'd built up in her head, of seeing if she could wear me down enough that I'd just accept it. And I was done, completely done. The next day, she came home from work and found me in our bedroom with her suitcase open on the bed. I was folding her clothes and putting them in systematically, not angry, not yelling, just calm and methodical, and she stood in the doorway asking what I was doing. I didn't even look up at her, just kept folding and told her she'd spent the last 8 months telling everyone who'd listen that she'd leave me for Max if she had the chance. So here was her chance. I was giving it to her, and she laughed. Actually laughed, said I was being dramatic and ridiculous, but I kept packing. She asked if I was serious, and I finally looked at her and told her I was dead serious. That if she wanted Max, she could go get Max because I wasn't standing in her way anymore. And her face changed, the smile dropped, and suddenly she was backtracking, saying she didn't actually mean any of it, that she loved me, that Max was just a friend. But I was already pulling out my phone and calling him. I put it on speaker, and when Max answered, I told him my wife was there and had something to tell him. And the silence on both ends was deafening. She was shaking her head frantically, but I just stared at her waiting, and Max asked what was going on, and I told him. I told him everything, how I was packing her bags, how she'd been saying for months she wanted him, how now she had her shot. Max's response was immediate and clear. He said he needed to say this with both of us hearing it, that he wasn't interested and never had been, that what she'd been doing was making him uncomfortable, that he valued our friendship, but this needed to stop, and I watched my wife's face crumble as her fantasy shattered in real time. I zipped up the suitcase, carried it to the front door, set it down in the hallway, and turned back to her. She was crying now, asking what I was doing, begging me to stop, but I just opened the door wide and told her there was her bag. There was the door. Max knew how she felt, and now it was up to her, and I stood there waiting to see what she'd do next. She didn't leave that night. She stood there in the doorway crying and begging me to close the door, saying she'd made a mistake, that she never meant any of it. But I told her she could either leave or sleep on the couch because I was done sharing a bed with someone who'd spent months fantasizing about my best friend. She chose the couch, and the next morning I woke up to find her gone to work like nothing had happened, like we could just move on from this. But I knew better now. I knew this wasn't something you just moved past. I called my sister that morning and told her everything. The comments, the texts to Max, the gym stalking, all of it. And she was silent for a long moment before telling me I needed to document everything. That if this was going to end in divorce, I needed proof of what had been happening. And that's when I realized how serious this had gotten. My sister came over that afternoon with her laptop, and we started making a list, every single comment my wife had made about Max that we could remember, every party, every dinner, every family gathering where she'd made these so-called jokes. And the list got long fast. We're talking 43 separate incidents that we could specifically remember with dates and witnesses. My sister created a spreadsheet, columns for date, location, what was said, who heard it. And as we filled it in, I felt sick looking at it all laid out like that, seeing the pattern, seeing how it had escalated from small comments to blatant declarations over the course of 8 months. But that was just the beginning. Max sent me screenshots of their text conversations, months worth of messages from her, some from early in the morning asking if he was awake, some late at night asking what he was doing, constant invitations to meet up for coffee or lunch, questions about his schedule, his hobbies, his relationship status. There were messages where she'd sent him photos of herself, nothing inappropriate but clearly fishing for compliments, gym selfies, new outfits, asking for his opinion, and Max's responses were always short and polite, but she never took the hint. My sister added all of this to the documentation, screenshot by screenshot, message by message, and we realized this had been going on for 4 months. For months of her actively pursuing my best friend, while coming home to me every night and acting like everything was normal. The worst part came when I decided to look through her stuff. I felt like a crazy person doing it, but I needed to know how deep this went. And in her nightstand drawer under some old magazines, I found a notebook, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. She'd written out Max's schedule, his gym times, his work address, the coffee shop he went to in the mornings, the route he took on his evening runs. She'd been tracking him like some kind of stalker, planning her day around being in the same places as him. And there were notes in the margins about what he was wearing, who he was with, whether he seemed happy or stressed. I took photos of every page with my phone, my hands shaking the whole time, and sent them to my sister, who responded with a single word: lawyer. I found a divorce attorney that week, a guy my sister's friend had used, and when I sat down in his office and showed him everything, the spreadsheet, the texts, the notebook, he leaned back in his chair and told me this was one of the clearer cases of obsessive behavior he'd seen, that while it wasn't technically illegal unless Max wanted to press charges for stalking, it was absolutely grounds for divorce and would likely mean she'd get nothing in the settlement. I opened a separate bank account that day and started moving money, not everything, just half of what we had saved, making sure I had access to funds she couldn't freeze or drain. I stopped wearing my wedding ring, stopped sleeping in our bedroom entirely, moved my stuff into the spare room, and started treating her like a roommate I couldn't stand rather than my wife. She noticed immediately, kept trying to talk to me, to fix things, to explain that she'd just been confused and going through something, and didn't know why she'd done any of it. But I was past the point of caring about her excuses. I just wanted out. My lawyer sent her the divorce papers 3 weeks later. She was served at work, which I felt a little bad about, but my attorney said it was better to do it somewhere public where she couldn't make a scene. And apparently he was right, because she came home that evening completely unhinged. I'd changed the locks the day before on my lawyer's advice, and when she couldn't get her key to work, she started pounding on the door, yelling at me to let her in, that this was her apartment too, that I couldn't just lock her out. I opened the door with the chain still on and told her she could collect her things, but she wasn't staying here anymore, that she could go to her parents' place or get a hotel, but she was done living with me. And she tried to force her way in, actually threw her shoulder against the door hard enough to break the chain, and I had to physically push her back into the hallway. My neighbor across the hall opened his door to see what was happening, and I asked him to call the building manager, and my wife finally backed off, standing there in the hallway crying and screaming that I was ruining everything, that I was throwing away our marriage over nothing. But all I could think about was that notebook with Max's schedule written in her handwriting. Her mother called me the next day, told me I was being cruel and unreasonable, that marriages go through rough patches and her daughter had made some mistakes, but that didn't mean we should divorce, that girls sometimes joke around in ways that seem inappropriate, but don't mean anything serious. I told her about the notebook, about the 4 months of messages, about showing up at Max's gym across town, and there was silence on the line before she said she'd talked to her daughter and hung up. Her father called an hour later, his tone completely different, apologizing for his daughter's behavior, saying he'd seen the warning signs but hadn't wanted to believe his kid could act like that, asking if there was any way to make this right. And I appreciated his honesty, but told him no, this was too far gone. The mediation hearing was scheduled for 2 months out, and in that time my wife tried everything to get me to change my mind, showing up at my work, sending me long emails about how sorry she was, leaving gifts outside the apartment door, but I documented all of it, forwarded the emails to my lawyer, took photos of the gifts with timestamps, because I knew she'd try to paint herself as the victim when we got to court. When we finally sat down for mediation with both our lawyers present, mine laid out everything: the spreadsheet, the texts, the notebook photos, the witness statements from family members and friends who'd heard her comments, and I watched her attorney's face change as he realized what he was dealing with. My wife was crying, saying she'd just wanted attention, that she'd felt ignored in our marriage, that she'd never actually intended to do anything with Max. But my lawyer cut her off and pointed out that intent didn't matter when you'd been stalking someone for 4 months and publicly humiliating your spouse. Her lawyer asked for a recess to speak with her privately, and when they came back 20 minutes later, he told us she was willing to sign an uncontested divorce, no alimony, split of assets down the middle, clean break. My lawyer and I stepped out to discuss it. He said this was the best outcome we could hope for without dragging it through court for another year. And I agreed. I just wanted it over. We went back in, papers were drawn up right there, and she signed everything with shaking hands. Wouldn't even look at me the whole time. And when it was done, she stood up and told me I'd destroyed our marriage, that I'd given up on us, that someday I'd regret pushing her away. And then she walked out with her lawyer, and I sat there feeling nothing but relief that it was finally over. The divorce was finalized 3 months after the mediation, 3 months of waiting for paperwork to process and courts to stamp everything official. And the day I got the final decree in the mail, I sat in my apartment staring at it for a long time, not feeling sad or angry, just exhausted and relieved that it was actually over. My sister came over that evening with takeout, and we celebrated quietly. No big party, just the two of us eating Chinese food on my couch and watching terrible movies. And she told me she was proud of me for getting out, for not letting myself be manipulated into staying. And that meant more to me than she probably knew. The first few weeks after everything was finalized were weird. I kept expecting to feel something dramatic, some big emotional breakdown or surge of regret. But mostly I just felt lighter, like I'd been carrying around this massive weight for months and had finally set it down. I started going to therapy, something my sister had been pushing me to do since the mediation, and my therapist helped me work through a lot of the damage my ex-wife's behavior had done, the constant gaslighting, the way she'd made me feel crazy for being upset about her comments, the erosion of my self-worth over those 8 months of marriage. It was slow work, but I was getting better, sleeping better, not constantly on edge waiting for the next humiliating joke at my expense. I started reconnecting with friends I'd let drift away during my marriage. People my ex-wife had always criticized or made excuses for why we couldn't hang out with them, and I realized how much I'd isolated myself trying to keep her happy. My buddy Jake, who I hadn't seen in over a year, invited me to a poker night, and I went. And it felt amazing to just sit around with guys who weren't judging me or making me feel like I was somehow deficient, just playing cards and talking about normal stuff. I started going to the gym more regularly. Not Max's gym because that felt weird after everything, but a place closer to my apartment, and I got into a routine that felt good. Felt like I was building something for myself instead of just existing in someone else's story. Work got better too. I'd been so distracted and stressed during my marriage that I'd been doing the bare minimum, showing up but not really present, and my boss had noticed. But now I was focusing again, taking on projects I'd been avoiding, actually caring about doing good work. 4 months after the divorce, I got called into my boss's office and thought I was in trouble for something. But instead, he offered me a promotion, a significant raise, and a team lead position, something I'd been passed over for the year before when I was too buried in my marriage drama to even apply properly. I used some of the money from the promotion to renovate my apartment, got rid of furniture that reminded me of my ex-wife, repainted the walls colors I actually liked instead of the beige she'd insisted on, bought a new couch, new bed, made the space actually feel like mine. My sister helped me pick out artwork, and I hung photos of friends and family instead of the generic prints my ex-wife had chosen, and walking into my apartment started to feel like coming home instead of just existing in a space. 6 months after the divorce, I took a trip, something I'd been planning to do with my ex-wife before everything fell apart. But I went alone instead, flew out to Colorado, and spent a week hiking and just being in nature. No phone service half the time, no social media, just me and the mountains and the silence. It was the first time in over a year that I felt completely at peace. No anxiety about what comment might be waiting for me when I got back. No dread about the next family gathering, just freedom. Max and I stayed close through all of this, closer actually than we'd been before, because now there was no weird tension hovering over our friendship, and he'd started dating someone seriously, a woman he'd met at his gym who was nothing like my ex-wife, confident and direct and not playing any games. Max brought her to meet me about 7 months after my divorce was finalized, and we all went out for dinner. And it was easy and comfortable and normal. And I realized this was what healthy relationships were supposed to look like. People who communicated clearly and didn't weaponize jokes to tear each other down. His girlfriend told me she'd heard the whole story from Max and thought I'd handled it better than most people would have, and I appreciated that. Appreciated that she didn't tiptoe around what had happened or try to pretend it wasn't weird. But the real kicker came about 8 months after the divorce. Max texted me one evening asking if I was home and could he come over, said it was important, and I told him yeah. And he showed up 20 minutes later with his laptop looking uncomfortable. He sat down and told me my ex-wife had started messaging him again, that at first it was just a friend request on social media which he'd ignored, but then she'd found his number somehow, probably still had it saved from before, and started texting him. Max showed me the messages and my blood ran cold reading them. She was telling him that now they were both single. Now there was nothing stopping them from trying. That she'd always felt this connection with him. That maybe the divorce was meant to happen so they could finally be together. She'd sent these messages over the course of 2 weeks, escalating from casual check-ins to basically propositioning him, asking him to meet her for drinks, telling him she'd been thinking about him constantly, that she knew he must have felt something too all those times they'd talked. Max said he hadn't responded to any of them, had been ignoring her completely, but wanted me to know in case she tried to spin some story later. Wanted me to have the screenshots as proof that her obsession hadn't ended with our divorce. It had just been waiting for what she thought was the right moment. I thanked Max for telling me and saved all the screenshots, not because I thought I'd need them legally, but because I wanted the validation that I'd made the right choice. That her behavior hadn't been about our marriage being broken or her feeling neglected like she'd claimed in mediation. It had always been about Max, about this fantasy she'd built up in her head. Max asked if he should block her or respond telling her to stop, and I told him to block her, that engaging with her at all would just encourage her to keep trying. He did it right there, blocked her on everything, and told me if she showed up at his gym or his work he'd document it and file a restraining order if needed, and I appreciated that he was taking it seriously, that he understood this wasn't just awkward, it was genuinely concerning behavior. I blocked my ex-wife on everything that night too, realized I'd never actually done that after the divorce, had just stopped checking her profiles and assumed she'd moved on. But clearly she hadn't. Clearly she was still living in whatever delusional reality she'd created where Max was going to suddenly want her. My therapist and I talked about it in our next session, about how validating it was to have concrete proof that I'd been right all along, that her jokes had never been jokes, They'd been declarations of intent that she'd dressed up as humor so she could deny them when confronted. My therapist told me something that stuck with me. Said that people who truly respect their partners don't spend months publicly fantasizing about leaving them. That jokes are supposed to bring people together, not tear them down. And that my ex-wife's behavior had been a form of emotional manipulation designed to make me accept progressively worse treatment. I left that session feeling like I'd finally closed the door completely on that chapter of my life. Like I had permission to stop wondering if maybe I'd overreacted or been too harsh. Because no, I'd done exactly what I needed to do to protect myself. Now I'm a year out from when I packed her bags, 10 months past the finalized divorce, and my life looks completely different in the best way possible. I've got my apartment exactly how I want it, a job I'm actually good at and getting recognized for, friends I see regularly, a relationship with my family that isn't constantly strained by someone else's drama, and genuine peace for the first time in years. I'm not dating yet, not really interested in jumping into anything when I'm still processing and healing, but I'm not closed off to it either, just taking things slow and focusing on building a life I actually want to live. My sister jokes that I dodged a bullet, but honestly, it was more like dodging a whole firing squad. Because if I'd stayed, I'd still be dealing with her obsession with Max, still defending myself against accusations that I was too sensitive, still having my reality questioned every time I called out her inappropriate behavior. I see posts sometimes on social media from mutual friends, and apparently my ex-wife has moved to a different city, new job, new apartment, and I hope for her sake she's getting help and working on whatever was driving that behavior. But mostly I just don't think about her anymore. She's become this weird chapter in my past that happened to someone who feels like a different person than who I am now. The biggest lesson I learned from all of this is that when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. Because my ex-wife spent 8 months telling me through her so-called jokes that she didn't value our marriage and was fantasizing about someone else. And I spent 8 months making excuses for her and hoping she'd change. And if I could go back, I'd pack those bags after the very first comment and save myself months of misery. But I can't go back. I can only move forward. And that's exactly what I'm doing. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments. Drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.